So what I'm going to talk about is how the mechanics of that can enhance your communication and the principles of communication. All in your respective disciplines, you're all heavily engaged in the academic principles of how you apply what you know to the people that have to know it, and whether that's clinical research or otherwise, or nursing. But just as so as you understand in that, you understand there are principles behind what you do. Sometimes we overlook the fact there are principles behind what we do when we give a talk, and it's about communication. So I'm going to talk to you about really the principles of communication. I'm going to touch on how a slide is designed and how you use animation and stuff, but what I want to take away from this is the notion that there is a principle, that there is a strategy to give a talk. Now, you don't have to do everything I say, and I have 2 children, so I'm very familiar with that concept, but don't exactly do the opposite, okay? Right. So we're going to talk about the architecture of a talk, how it goes together, why it works, why it doesn't work, right? And now, we all have material that we generate which is suitable for communication in our academic lives. They can be all sorts of reports. Now, I'm a basic scientist, so I publish all my work in Science and Nature. God, you're a stiff lot, aren't you? No, I don't really, but I would like to, right? But there is a journal format, and the journal format is a very particular way of doing it. There is a group, there is a conference room, right? And I'm going to focus pretty much on the 15-minute conference talk here, because I think that, oddly enough, is much more challenging than any other kind of talk that you're going to do. Because you have to distill in a very short period of time a punchy message which is of interest. There is the poster too. The poster and the paper and the grant all have to have different strategies to communicate basically the same content. So why invest in communication? Why is communication? There's about 10 things I've thought of. So why invest in communication?
Make sure you get your message across.
You busy making notes on the phone. What do you think? Next.
You get grants.
Sorry? Absolutely, get grants. Keep thinking. Yeah.
Just because you know what you're trying to say doesn't mean other people will understand.
Yeah, that's right. Capture that idea in a different way. You're trying to then
Convince.
Convince and influence. We're back there.
Taxpayer money has to be.
Yeah, accountability. That is actually very, very important. We are accountable, and if we show how we're accountable, we'll be more successful. What do you think?
So people understand how you're treating patients or doing things?
Yeah, being able to, and there's a whole art form to that, which is a completely different kind of lecture, which I'm sure you're going to be exposed to at some point. Be persuasive, more grants. Inspire. You're going to have people working for you, whether they're residents or in your team, whether they're students, and you have to be inspired by them. All of you at the moment, with the stage in your careers, there are some parts of your role where you're working for somebody else, or there is a leader in the team. It makes a heck of a difference if that person is a good communicator or not. Improve collaboration. We can't do this on our own. We have to work with other people. Being able to communicate effectively makes that so much easier. Excite people and get them enthusiastic, get them on your side. That opens opportunities and opens up doors. Your goal at the end of your talk is to do what, do you think? At the end of the talk, you're in a big conference, you've done your talk, everybody claps, there's 2 questions which you managed to stumble through. What do you want at the end of it?
People to agree or to be interested in what you're saying.
Yeah, people to come up to you and say, that was a great talk, can you? If you have a list of people, that's what you want. It's about making that happen. Curiosity, leadership, becoming a leader, getting your ideas across, being a prime mover. And that is very satisfying. It's not about the accolades of getting a paper in a high impact journal. It's the satisfaction of changing how other people think about a problem. And being open yourself to changing the way you think. Increase the impact of your work, right? You have been invested or given the trust by the taxpayers to do your work. Well, showing that and increasing your impact is very important. So communication, as I said to you, is actually a process. And there are elements in it, and we can break it down in an analytical way. This, of course, is independent about whether it's science or some other topic. Right? So there's a why component, there's a how component, and there's a what component. So why are we doing it, how we did it, what we found. Right? You're all familiar with that. And all of you, when you do a poster or something, you construct it like that. Now, these bubbles show the size of influence that we typically ascribe to them. But in reality, this has to be much more important and much more central to the idea. If you convince people why you're doing something, all the other things fall into place. So I often see people slap together an introductory slide saying, heart disease is a bad thing. It will be, we are studying this bad thing to make it better. MAP kinase activates, right? So it's not connected, right? You have to put together a construction of why you're doing something. If you do that, even people who are not interested necessarily in your topic, we tend to micro-specialize. But actually, if you want to be a successful scientist, researcher, clinician, you have to be able to combine that micro-specialism with the ability to be a generalist and learn broadly. So this is the idea. This is the golden circle, and I'll show you where I got this from at the end. Why is the driver? How is the process? What is the product? Now, I want you to turn to the person next to you and in 2-3 sentences say, what do you do? Tell them what you do. Oh yeah, you have to do it. Go on. What do you do? Don't be lonely in the background. Talk to them. Well, this is all very good. Okay. So I could go home at this point because you're obviously engaged in talking to each other more than you want to listen to me. So that's a good sign. But I did it for a reason. You can stay there if you want. Now you did that. You can define yourself by saying what you are. Like, I am a postdoc, I am a resident, I am a nursing student, I am whatever, right? And I was eavesdropping that babble there. And actually, you're all very good because you got beyond that pretty fast, right? And it says, I don't know, and this is the important point. It doesn't mean what you do for money, it means what you do for the world, right? So it doesn't matter, you are not defined by your job title or job description, you're defined by what you do for the world. And if you think about it that way, then it helps you put across your idea. And all of the most famous people you know, and we'll discover whether you know these people or not, actually did that. Who are these two characters? Watson and Crick. And they're pointing at a bit of the structure of DNA they proposed, which they worked out over a pint of beer and put bits of cardboard together and somehow made this, right? But the point was they got a structure together. Any of you read? What's that? Anybody? That's a sign. It's Kimberly got the thunder machine going. So what? Has any of you read the paper they wrote? Go and look it up. It's brilliant. How long do you think it is?
5 pages.
How long do you think it is?
1 page.
Very good. It's 1 page. The secret of genetic transfer at the molecular level is a 1-page paper. And they put in this, it has not escaped our notice that the specific pairing we have postulated immediately suggests a possible copying mechanism for the genetic material. That's why they got a Nobel Prize. And they pinched somebody else's data, but we won't go into that. So, who is this lady?
Nightingale.
Very good there, you see you got that straight away. And she was...
Mark, could you repeat what some of the people are saying, because they can't hear online. They can't always hear exactly.
All right, sure, happy to.
I'll try to use the mic as well. And someone is not muted. Would you please check and make sure that you are muted, please, because we're hearing a lot of background noise. Thank you.
You're the one who's currently in the thunderstorm. So get under cover. So how you present can change the world. It really can. And she was a very straightforward, very clever woman. And we have in Britain the myth, really, of her being famous for her compassion, typifying the sort of image or the romantic image of nursing, of caring for the patients. But in fact, she did that through the mechanism of being a brilliant scientist. So she says something which I think we can think of today. It may seem a strange principle to enunciate as the very first requirement in a hospital that it should do the sick no harm. You know, that's something we worry about today. The second cause of death in the country is what happens in hospitals to people, okay? So, you know, you think about that. So, she had to convince, her bosses were generals in the British Army in Victorian England, well known for their open-minded approach to problems and problem solving, right? And how she did this, she made it such a compelling argument that they could not disagree. She was one of the first people to invent graphical representations of complex data sets. So what she wants to show here is the number of soldiers who lose their lives in the battle, which is the blue one, and after the battle, and as a function of the year. So these are the months, right? And you can see that in January, many more soldiers lost their lives after the battle than actually in it. And that was because of the horrendous conditions in the hospitals. And of course, by this incredibly compelling data, then she convinced them to change those processes, the care of the patients. Who are these two people?
Einstein.
And
His friend.
his friend, his mate. Yeah, I just took this random picture of one of his mates. Well, of course, any one of Einstein's mates is probably a famous physicist. It's actually Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer was the scientific director of the Manhattan Project. What was the Manhattan Project? Building the atomic bomb in World War II. And what Einstein did, the most, I don't know, have any of you attempted to read of any of Einstein's papers? You know, I read a biography, there's a fabulous biography of him, and I really recommend it to you. He was a bit of a naughty boy, really, actually, you will find. Anyway, fantastic biography. And in this biography, there are bits of the equations and the theory of relativity, and I haven't got a clue. So this is a person who is thinking at the cutting edge of mathematics, physics, science, astronomy. He's communicating to the president, and he says, in the course of the last 4 months, it has been made probable through the work of Joly in France, as well as Fermi and Szilard in America, that it may be possible to set up a nuclear reaction in a large mass of uranium by which vast amounts of power and large quantities of new radium-like elements would be generated. How it appears almost certain that this could be achieved, now it appears that this could be achieved in the immediate future. This new phenomenon would also lead to the construction of bombs. All of you know the idea of an elevator pitch, don't you? This is the elevator pitch par excellence, isn't it? In one paragraph, you go, okay, got it. You know, he didn't write equations. He didn't try and explain fission, fusion, all those things. He then convinced the president then to, what?
The author of the biography?
We'll look it up. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's a brilliant biography, so I'll just give you that tease. It's a big, thick book. Thick book called Einstein. Look that up.
There's two. There's more than one.
There's no doubt more than one, but it's the one I read. So let's come back to planet Earth. I mean, I'm convincing you there. These people made a difference to what happened because not only were they clever, there were plenty of clever physicists around, but because they could communicate effectively the big picture. So let's talk about the conference. And there's a particular strategy for the conference. And when you go to conference, you've got to understand who you're talking to. I just came back from the British Toxicological Society to give a talk. I'm not a toxicologist. They are not mitochondrial people. So I had to think about how to talk to that audience. So very often, we don't bother about that bit. We just think we're doing some lab meeting type activity. And we then end up talking to ourselves. Right? And of course, not surprisingly, it goes well. Right? Really, you should be thinking about talking to the Shark Tank because it's the people outside wanting to be critical, wanting to make a case. Now, if you're talking to yourself, it's like, you know, how did you do that? So our lab meeting, all of you must have some equivalent of a lab meeting, whether it's a case discussion or whatever, where you get as a group and you discuss something. A lot of it quickly becomes about how did you do that, right? That's not actually part of the thing you want to emphasize in the talk. So if you're talking to yourself, how becomes the important thing because you already know why. But if you're talking to the Shark Tank, they want to know why. Why is this going to make a difference? Why do you want to do it? Why should I be bothered, right? So why is the critical factor? And on top of that, you're telling a story. And don't lose sight of that fact. Giving a presentation is a performance art. It's telling a story. And you have to put yourself in the mode of telling a story because otherwise it will not be as effective. Who is this person? The greatest storyteller of all time. You've seen it.
Shakespeare?
No, he's a little bit older than that, isn't he, right? He's not very Shakespearean. Dickens, very good. Right, Charles Dickens. And you've all seen his films, right? Great Expectations and all that. He wrote books, right? You didn't write it. You haven't, okay. Go on, Wayne. What's the matter? Is it early in the morning? Anyway. Honestly, his English is a bit heavy going. I don't know whether you've actually, any of you seen The Christmas Carol? Right? Brilliant story, isn't it, right? About forgiveness, redemption, guilt, you know, all of those great themes, right? But if you try and read it, I find the English heavy going, to be frank. But what he made his money in was actually selling the stories one chapter at a time in the newspaper. And it was before TV, obviously, radio, it was the archetypal soap. So he wrote soaps. So the idea was that you get to the thing and you had to know what happened next and you had to buy the paper next week. It wasn't until later they were put together as books. So he went on talking tours across the United States, for example. He actually changed, had a dramatic impact on social conditions in the United Kingdom. Why is that? So he's writing novels, and these novels are very elaborate, we use the word Dickensian, right? Why did he have such a big impact? He changed things. You know, because he highlighted the problems of poverty. He highlighted the problems of debtors' prisons. And because of what he wrote, it raised public consciousness and it changed. But he was very clever. When he was a storyteller, he only said one thing in that chapter. And that's what you need to do, we need to do when we give a talk. What is the one thing we want to say? So don't start off saying, oh, I've got these slides, let's put them together. Start off with saying, what is the one thing I want to put across? It is a performance art. If you go to the symphony or you go to a rock band, it doesn't really matter. There is a big difference isn't there, between being there in person and watching the performance than hearing it on the CD or the iPhone or whatever it is nowadays, right? So huge difference. So it is a performance art. So how you perform will make a difference to how it's received. So a part of that are things like dress code. You see, you can overdo it a little bit. And this might be appropriate for a ball, but it's not for that. Or you can go completely the other way, be so cool that, you know, you don't really need to give the talk because I'm so cool anyway. It's important to be comfortable, right? And you don't need to be making a statement by what you're wearing. You've got to be neutral in that. So if you're in a conference where the general thing is people are quite formal and they wear ties and jackets or business suits, then do that. If you're in the conference at the beach where everybody's in the shorts and things, then that's okay too. Fit in. It's not about making a statement with how you dress. Now, you've got a bit of a challenge here. The way information is set out in a paper has a linearity because people are somewhat disciplined to read it in sequence. So, first of all, this kind of way of presenting something is not very attractive on a visual way. So your idea here is a lot of people think that when they give a talk, it's about transferring the information you have to your audience. Actually, it's really about motivating your audience to think about what you're saying. So information transfer has to be in it, but that's not the driver. So let's think about how we do this. So when you start with introducing a topic, we can do it on the information transfer model. And I'm going to give you an example of an introduction of using the same slide, but one doing it by the how information transfer and then one doing it by the why. So imagine I'm in the conference, I've had my introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. We're going to discuss the Akita type 1 diabetes mouse model. It has an insulin chain that is mutated. That mutated insulin chain causes misfolding. That damages the beta cell, causes ER stress, cell death, and hyperglycemia. I'm going to tell you how we use this model. That's an okay introduction, isn't it? But it's completely informational. There's no motivator. You're shaking your head, right?
I said no.
Good, thank you. So let's take the same slide and do it different. Now, first of all, you notice I changed the title, right? So think carefully about titles. You can have the same information from one, but you often will use the same module in one talk or another, but you might change the title to change the pitch and the emphasis. Do it again. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. What I'm going to talk to you about is something that's critical to diabetes. Why do the cells that make insulin, beta cells, die? To do this, we're going to use an insulin chain mutation. Insulin is being made in these cells. The cell is dedicating 50% of its effort to it. What we have is a mutation from cysteine to tyrosine, which happens in humans, which causes the misfolding. Why does this matter? Why does it make a difference? Why does it cause diabetes? Because that misfolded protein can't be handled and it causes the eventual death leading to hyperglycemia. I'm going to show you our data which shows how that's involved, how mitochondrial function is there, and some strategies for therapeutic intervention. So hopefully, which one was better? Oh, thank you. I'm glad we got that right. So, but you see what I'm saying, right? They're both the same content, and I didn't say anything particularly informationally different from one to the other, but I made you think, oh, what's he going to show next? Right? Well, I'm not going to show anything about this next because it was an example. Now, let's talk about slide design. There are a distressing number of potential backgrounds you can use in PowerPoint. Actually, do not use any of them. Either use white or black, because otherwise you will be in big trouble. Here is a fancy one, right? You can't read the bottom part, right? It's all shaded. The contrast is all different. The other, and you don't have to have UAB School of Medicine tattooed on your forehead throughout your entire talk and every body part, okay? You only need it once, right? I know they're going to shoot me if they hear this, but you really don't need the branding on every single slide, honestly. Now, what you're trying to do here is get the best clarity you can. Any of you have been in conferences, the age of the bulb on the projector is completely random. There is a big controller thing, and people fiddle with this, right? And the people who fiddle with it are colorblind. So they completely, it's a complete disaster. I'm colorblind, by the way. So it's a complete disaster. You can't rely, you have to have the highest contrast you can get. There's another reason for doing white like this, I'll tell you why. It's because if you want to use this as part of a review or something, you don't have to completely restructure and redraw the picture. It's ready to go straight off. Now, let's go and talk about stories and different kinds of stories. You all would recognize, if we talked about different narrative styles, that there are different ways of doing it. You can talk about the ending. You can talk about a chronology. This is the history of Coke bottles. I'm sure you would all rush to that talk. You can talk about a mystery. You can solve a problem. It can be a puzzle which you don't actually resolve. So any of these works. Make sure you stick to one. Don't switch narratives. So don't start off with the ending first and then turn it into a mystery. Because if you say, oh, we found this dramatic result, and then you don't deliver on what it was and leave it end as a mystery, people are a bit dissatisfied. They find it a bit of a tease, right? So the dramatic ending first. This is the Bayeux Tapestry, which was made by the Normans when they conquered England in 1066, saying how great they were, and it's their version of the battle. And this is King Harold, the king of the Anglo-Saxons then, and he was killed in this battle, and it says Harold the king gets it in the eye. So he was shot through the eye and died, right? And that is the dramatic ending first, and you can have a very good narrative, very gripping narrative of how you got to that place and how that happened. So how do you do this? The key thing is controlling the flow of the data. And animation's only use for you in giving this kind of talk is to control the flow of information. So you start off by structuring the talk in the way that you see it, the concept, why, the method, how, the data, what, and the interpretation, back to why again. So why sandwiches both ends of this talk. And so it would look like this. You have a why concept slide, you have the methods of how you do it, you have some results, and now you come back and you modify the slide that you showed at the beginning to show what you found. And that gives people a sense of a journey. It gives them a sense of a narrative, a sense of a story. Clarity is the goal when you try and put this together. And this is, you never see this in Alabama, do you? But it's pretty austere, pretty Swedish or something. But even people who are very clever, right? If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So go back to his letter. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And you know what? I always encourage you to give a talk anytime you can and prepare for it and do it well, because sometimes you do in fact discover you don't understand it well enough. And as a consequence, then you've got the opportunity then to get to understand it better. And sometimes you have to step back and say, whoa, I really don't get that data, actually. So that really happens, you know. I mean, I have actually done it when I've been giving a talk and I'm going, oh God. I didn't think it meant right? So if you prepare properly, you won't do that to yourself, right? But it is part of it does make you think deeply when you have to explain it to somebody else. What are the 3 worst things you can do in a talk?
Not know your audience.
Yeah, that's not the worst thing, but it is an important thing. What do you think?
Don't understand your data.
Yeah, that would be right. Another thing. There are 5 things then, right?
I would be disorganized.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that all of you have experienced, and none of you like it if a speaker does this.
Or monitoring.
I go over time, right? I completely disaster that. Many of you will have to do a job interview at some point, and part of that, well, all of you are going to have to do a job interview, but often part of that, there will be a talk in it. The only way you can totally mess up your job interview and lose a job is if you go over time. You know, I've been in job interview things where I've heard people go out and say, "Well, I didn't understand any of that, but it was pretty good." Because, you know, people's tolerance level is very high if you make an effort and you are on time. Too much information, somebody said that, right? Going over time. So how do you handle that? Let's talk about 15 minutes. That means you've got approximately, and I promise you this is an absolute rule. If you do this, you will not go over time. 0.8 minutes per slide. That means you can have 16 slides, 17 slides maximum. If you do this, you will not go over time and you will make sense. I've had people who've got, 30 slides for a 15-minute talk, and I say, you can't do that, it's not going to work. Don't worry, I'll talk faster. Have you heard somebody say that? I've heard it. Yeah? And it really helps, doesn't it, right? So you've got the introduction, the title slide is a slide, and you can use the title slide actually to get into your work. Introduction is actually longer than you think. The setup, the why is important, 4 slides. Hypothesis or concept, the data is 9 to 10 slides, but you show 7 to 8 pieces of data and you explain what the data is. Anyway, I'm a basic scientist, so I'll tell you. Yes, come in. Right. There are one bar chart looks exactly like another bar chart. One kind of blot looks exactly like another kind of blot, right? So you've got to say what you're doing. Summary, and then 1 or 2 slides, and then acknowledgement. Problem number 2, boring the audience. Whose problem is this? The speaker. If you are not interested in what you're doing, nobody else is going to be. So, why are you presenting? You need to ask yourself the question why you are there. Unless you've got that straight in your head, then you're not going to engage the audience. Are you enthusiastic? And then you need some friends. Oh, have you got friends, any of you? Just working too hard. You've got some friends, right? You need some honest feedback for people to tell you, okay, you're overdoing it. Okay, you've got to be different. And I tell you, there are gender differences here. So this is one style. And I don't know whether you know this, but curb your enthusiasm it's sarcastic, of course, he's got no enthusiasm whatsoever, right? So if you say, yeah, I'm going to show you some data, I don't know, it's just some stuff we did in the lab. We don't really know what it means. Could be important. You're already gone to sleep, haven't you, right? The other thing can be the other end, My data is fantastic. We will cure cancer here. And I am so excited to be with you today and tell you all about this in our first experiments, which were stunning, I've seen both, honestly. So, all right, you've got to hit some middle level, right? Performance anxiety. Who gets nervous before you give a talk? I get nervous before I give you this talk. I've done it a million times by now. But the point is, if you're not nervous, ask yourself why. It means you don't care, right? I'm not talking about flat out terror and shakes, okay? For that, you probably need some chemical intervention. I'm talking about being anxious, right? A bit of that is good. So as Mark Twain says, there are 2 types of speakers, those that are nervous and those that are liars. Being nervous is good. Use it. Let it feed you. Let it drive you. Your concentration comes up because your adrenaline kicks in because it's the same nervous system as when you think you're going to be eaten by a lion. So not being able to answer the questions is roughly the same emotion, right? Now, you can put anxiety in the audience, and you can do this very easily. I should always make sure I have a laser pointer, but what you can do is when you start waving this around and then dots appear on the audience, they think the SAS is going to burst through the room to shoot somebody, right? So lasers can induce anxiety. They're all very clear now. So other distractions, other things that make people go crazy, right? Dress comfortably, we talked about that. Do not mumble. If you do not talk very clearly, people can't understand what you say. Can you hear me at the back? And very people say, oh, do I really want to hear him? No. Yes, it's fine. Right. So you've got to project. I promise you, however weird it seems to be talking as if you're a Shakespearean actor, actually some kind of projection like that will not be exaggerated when you're on a podium, when you're in front of it. It will not, I promise you. You can't look silly like that, but you can look being affected by just sitting there mumbling. Do not speak too fast. You have to have a cadence to your voice. You have to use pauses. You have to say things. In each slide, you should only say 3 sentences. So only say 3 things. That way, your slide will only be about 50 seconds. And you'll make a point. Design the slide so you only have to say 3 things. Do not read from the slides or the script because then you don't have any eye contact or engagement with the audience and it's boring. Your audience probably can read already, so they don't need that. Don't shuffle if you start doing this sort of thing. You know, and if you start swaying like this, then people reach for that little plastic bag in the front of them because they think they're going to get seasick. So, you know, it's very distracting doing this, right? Talk to the screen, not the audience. The screen is not your audience. Weather forecast. I should have made sure you don't have a point. I can probably do it on here. So today the data is coming in from the Far East. It will over the noon come here. It will then dump on us all and then go out in the afternoon. Right? Oh, you're all laughing because you've seen it, haven't you? Right? If you want to point at something, point at something. Right? All right, too much information. How do you control that? Now, you may want to put all of this information in your talk, and it may be important for you to do that. And I'm not saying you can't, but you have to build it up. So maybe the 2 important things to you are the pub and the tea gardens. So you could be sitting there with your partner and saying, shall we go to the pub or shall we go to the tea gardens? And then you quickly focus on the pub, right? This actually then focuses you because what we often do is we have something with a lot of information, but we only use one tiny bit of it. So only show the information that's part of your story, not all of it. So it's controlling the flow. So this is one of my papers actually. So this is what it kind of looks like, data. And it's a bit of a challenge of how to manage this in a talk, right? If you write it down, people follow panel A, panel B, panel C, panel D, and you have a narrative which controls that flow, right? You don't have that in the talk. So you break it up. Never use the same figure just like that. Now you can paste the figure in, and what I've done is I've put white in. Another reason to use white backgrounds, I put white boxes over the other data. So now the box disappears, and I'm animating it left to right because the data goes left to right. And so I'm controlling how you see that data. And then I can actually build it up. Now, the advantage to that is that it means that I show you one thing at a time. So this is a very complicated piece of data. but I can break it down into 3 different bits. I can talk about that, then build that up. If I were just to show you that straight off and attempt to point my way through this, none of you would be able to follow that. And in fact, more dangerous, the likelihood of me getting lost within it is very high. You'll be surprised. When you see things like this on a screen, your brain is not used to seeing it like that, and you will get lost in your own slide. Whereas if you do it like this, you can't get lost in your own slide. And it forces you to talk about things in order. You don't have to, you can only talk about this because it's the only thing you're looking at. All right? We can show concept slides and introduce one bit at a time, like that. And then you can actually say we changed something, and then all of these things changed with it. So if I show you this all in one go, it's very difficult to understand what I'm trying to put across to you. But if I do it like this and say, you know, different cells have different mitochondrial function, different glycolysis. Monocytes have both. Neutrophils don't have mitochondria. Lymphocytes are mostly mitochondria. Platelets have a bit of both. If we take the glucose out, they all change, showing that all of them are using glucose. That is so much easier for me to be very disciplined to just use the 3 or 4 sentences there because of the way I did that. This kind of data is very difficult. Have you ever seen that kind of thing? What's the next thing the speaker says?
I'm sorry you can't see it.
I'm sorry you can't see it, right? Well, why the hell are you showing me then, right? So there is a way around to do that. So first of all, you show the scheme of the different aspects of the biology that are happening here. And you're going to say, I'm going to show you how the way platelet function is changing due to the proteins we saw modified in this slide. And then you break it up. You show sets of the protein, the things that are modified at a time. And you can color code these. And then you can make them bigger so that they match this over here. And then you can do the same for the rest of these, right? And then split it all up into different parts. So there are ways of using these complicated data sets in a way that people can get the point and absorb the information. But it's going to be a very different approach than if you printed it as a table in a paper. So, you know, there are lots of things you can do. Bullet points, they work, but, you know, if you overdo it, then you've got lots of text. It's irritating. So where possible, slides are a visual thing. And if you use pictures, you will have a much better impact, and you can emphasize it. So for example, if you were giving a talk about coronary heart disease, you want to have some background, and all of these things are important things, and that you want to make that point. But what's going to happen is you are already, even though we're not talking about coronary heart disease, every single one of you is reading this, right? That's what happens. You lose control of the narrative. So use pictures. Cardiac surgery is a very common procedure. It can be valve replacement or bypassed. It then involves changing the, and you can talk about what actually here. Then you can have 1 or 2 bullet points at the bottom, which allows you to control that. The pictures are much more powerful and get you much faster to the point you want to make. When you go and give a talk, make sure that you go up and try it. Go earlier when there's nobody there. There will always be a time when they say you can load your slides up. Check on the actual computer being used. It's very disruptive to insist on using your computer, and really you should not do that for a 15-minute talk because it's too disruptive. You can't change them that fast. Therefore, you're going to be on a flash drive, and you need to take that opportunity to see that it works, because then you have a chance to change it. If you're in a big room with 3 screens, obviously you can't use the laser pointer because it only goes to 1. You have to use the cursor. I mean, one thing, I'm as you know, I'm having some senior moments from now and again. I can't do very easily the controller when it has the pointer built into it. So then I turn either the projector off the computer or something like that. If you are not very coordinated, like I'm not, then have your own laser pointer or use the mouse to point so you don't do that, right? There is, built into your programs, there are little squiggly lines and things. They're not decoration. It means you spelt it wrong. For goodness sake, don't accept it into your dictionary, otherwise it's there forever. Have you ever heard the thing, oh, it's a Mac versus PC problem? Someone say, that's total nonsense, isn't it? It's a person problem. You didn't bother to check whether we have people come and give us seminars and say, do you have the adapter? And we say, no, we don't. Why would we, right? It's fine if you have a Mac to call ahead and say, do your adapter. But really, you need to buy your own adapter if they haven't got it. Spell check, because spellings are very difficult to spot on slides, actually. And check this compatibility and have a backup. I always email my talk to me or put it in a Dropbox in case, you know, I drop the flash drive on coming down here walking or something like that. This is the flag of Alabama. So why would this randomly appear in your talk? Have you ever seen this happen? You know why it happens?
Oh, your videos.
It's because you have data which is embedded in another computer and you haven't transferred the primary data. So the PowerPoint is talking to a data file that's now in your office and you're 2,000 miles away, right? So make sure that you transfer your talk onto another computer and then flick through it to make sure that you've transferred the data files that match it. You can get around this very easily if you need to by when you take a data file which is like from Excel or something which is embedded, is instead of copy the picture and paste it as a picture, not a data file. It means you can't change the data, but it means this will never happen. The beauty of that, by the way, I use that a lot, is to take the data file, the picture, the graph, copy it in, and when you right-click and paste, then paste it as a picture, because when you change the proportions of it, all of the fonts don't get out of match, right? It all stays in proportion. Questions. Questions are very tricky, right? Questions are most nerve-wracking things. So always listen. Don't cut the question. I mean, what will happen is you'll be relieved that you can answer any question, and then you'll try and interrupt, right? Be open and interested. Don't go, you know. You have to be how you can't express how you feel. If you are kind of irritated because it's a stupid question, you think, then, and you show that, that will come across. Thank the questioner, don't look offended or irritated. Now, difficult questions, right? I'm going to give you some trade secrets here. Multiple questions within one. This is a senior investigator syndrome, and they amble up to the microphone and say, "For a very nice talk. I only have 17 questions." And then they go on, right? And what they're really saying is to the organizers, you should have asked me to give this talk, right? What you can do is answer the last one, or any one that you got, and then you say, I forgot the other. You remember? Because, I'll tell you, these are always older people, and I'm an older person, so I can say this. They will have also forgotten. Questions in the middle of your talk. You will not get this in a 15-minute talk, and it's a little bit of a judgment call. If you go and give a university seminar, like I'm in the Centre for Free Radical Biology, we enjoy harassing the speakers and ask questions all the way through. Now, that's okay, and it can be quite engaging and quite fun, actually, but then you have to adapt. So you can say, good point, I'll get to it. Don't flash through to your slides and show, don't be tempted to go 5 slides forward to show that point. Just say, I'm going to get to it. Good point, let me come back to it. You can answer, but very short. But you need to take a minute to get yourself back. Now, there's a penalty here. If you have an hour talk, 50-minute talk for an hour slot, and you get off on these discussions, it's up to you to still end at 50 minutes. That doesn't give you the right, the entitlement to go 1 hour and 10 minutes. Do not do that, okay? It's okay. They wanted that. You're there to serve them. That's the discussion. We did that and did not get the same result. It's because you're incompetent. Well, you can't say that, can you? And that's almost impossible to say deal with on the spot. I'll discuss with you in some detail later. There are differences in our cell type conditions. Yes, we know that literature. What we did that's different is this, right? You did not cite my work. Well, you're in trouble there because you probably should have done. Yes, we are aware of these pioneering studies, but we don't have a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I should have mentioned them. Really, you know, you just have to say, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned them because, you know, why not, right? You should do this experiment. This is also a senior person's very cheeky thing to say, right? So when people say that to me, I say, yes, we have the same thought. We're now doing studies along those lines, whether you are or not. And great experiment, we'll do it when we get back, right? And if you like it, you could say, oh, maybe we should collaborate on that, you know? Long statement with no question. Thank you. You can say, it's usually a position statement which undermines the premise of what you're trying to do. So you can challenge it a little bit, but don't get into a big, that is a bit dangerous because there's a to and fro type thing. The answer that never fails is what?
I don't know.
Yeah, but do you ever hear anybody of my generation say that? And that is not because we don't know. We have codes. We have a code. Interesting point. Means I don't know. We thought this. I have no idea what you're talking about. Right? And I don't know. I'm going to tell you something totally different, which is unrelated. We should look into this more. I don't know. And I'll tell you why it's quite good. Is because it gives you a second or two to think. And when you do that, something pops into your head and then you can start the dialogue. Right? Polite and rude behaviors in talks. You've got to stay on time, you've got to be interested and answer questions thoughtfully. Don't do email or the phone. I know we don't set a good example. All right, I do, but don't do it. It is very rude. Nothing is going to kill you to sit there for the 15, 20 minutes and pay attention. And you wouldn't like it if people were doing it to you. Don't talk to your neighbor. It's very disruptive to people around you. Don't get up in the middle unless you're having a heart attack or something. I mean, probably then falling over. But I mean, you know, don't, if you can't be there for the whole thing, don't go. Don't come late, because now there is an exception to that. If people are running parallel sessions and they all get out of, you know, coordination, which they often do, then it's okay. Don't leave before the questions are finished. I mean, if you're in an hour talk and you're at 50 minutes and there are questions, that's not an excuse for you all to get up, or anybody, not you particularly, but for people to get up and go. Betterly, don't come in, take the box lunch, scarf it down, then set, if you're a medic, set your bleeper off and run away. You know, that is not good. Or, you know, look on your phone and then come up with some pseudo thing and disappear. I mean, it is, if you can't commit, don't do it. Because people put a lot of effort into this, and it's respectful to give them that thing. Do ask questions. Questions are important for all of us. There's nothing worse, by the way, if you give the talk and nobody asks you a question. And one of your jobs, if any of you chaired a session, one of your jobs as a chairing a session is you've got to know where, you've got 3 jobs. Do you know what they are? What are they? It's obvious.
Keep people on time.
Keep people on time. That's number 1 job. Number 2 job is?
Make sure there's questions.
You have to have some questions yourself. And quite often what happens, you know, is if you're sharing it, it's happened to me thousands of times, if you're sharing it, you start off with a couple of questions and then they pick up, right? Third thing is you've got to make yourself aware of the person doing it, and you've got to be able to pronounce their name, right? And don't be afraid to ask. Okay, be generous. It's not the Academy Award. Nothing can change the buzz you get from doing a great talk. If somebody previously in your lab comes along and says, oh, I think you should have acknowledged me for that work. Because it can happen easily. We often give historical data in a talk which sets something up, and we haven't acknowledged that. So ask where data comes from. It doesn't cost you anything. On the other hand, it's not the Academy Awards, okay? So the communication is not just about the seminar. I mean, this is the ultimate elevator pitch. They don't need to talk. They communicate well without it. You can be on a plane. You can be on a date. You can be in the bar with your friends. And the British thing is that you, every Friday, go for a beer, and the goal is to wind up your friends by provoking them to say something, get inappropriate or controversial, right? So that's one sport we have. But it's part of that communication, right? This is the student committee meeting. You've got to be able to navigate that. All of the things that I have seen, I've sat in committees where the faculty then take over and start debating things with themselves. Anybody done that? Seen that? That's because you're not in charge. Okay? You're not standing. Sometimes people say, make you feel better. Oh, you don't have to stand up. It's okay. Sit down. Don't do that. If you stand up and do a presentation, it gives you a position of authority straight off. Right? It's like the preacher being 6 foot above contradiction, as we say. Specific aims pages, your company, Steve Jobs, the family thing. Next time you go back and your auntie says, well, what do you do then? You know, have an answer which is interesting to them. Right? And of course, the poster presentation. The concepts of this, which I drew on, is Simon Sinek, which is a TED talk. And I recommend it to you. It's pretty good. It's about 15, 20 minutes. It's got nothing to do with science, but you can see where the principles that I've taught you about came from. And of course, I should thank my group who've all suffered through me developing these talks over the years. So, any questions? Remember what I said about questions.
I have one comment. There is also a really interesting TED talk from Chris about his career, and I listened that one. It's really nice because it was not so easy for him to do an idiot.
Right. So the comment was that there's a night. Is it on YouTube or something?
I cannot understand.
There is a sort of narrative from Francis Crick about his career and what he did and so on. Any other questions? Oh, come on, give me one more question, for goodness sake.
Said white background or black background. Is it okay to switch in the middle?
Yeah, of course. Actually, that's a good point, is that if you have microscopy data which requires a high contrast, it's much better to make the slide completely black. You can see that a lot better. So choose it depending on the data you're trying to present. Some works better on black and white, you know. Some people do all black all the way through. That's fine, and there's no problem with that.
What about references? You know, if you're citing literature, do you just jam them all at the end?
No.
Or should you just put the name and date? Or should you have the whole citation?
No. What I would typically do is in the bottom corner is just put something which is big enough to read, which is the minimum you need to find it, right? Because what you're doing is your slide's only there for 20 seconds, so the amount of information people can get off it are very different. But it's generally acknowledged that if you show data from other people, which is quite a good thing to do in many ways, then you should acknowledge where it came from.
It's just that slides are often used, you know, they get distributed to the people who've attended the talks, right? So yes, your slides are for your oral presentation, but they are often given as a handout at the end. And so it's always trying to strike that balance of.
Well, it depends. Yeah, that's a good point.
But then people have this, you know, packet.
In fact, I have to do a talk like that for ATS in a few weeks, and in the way I would do that then is do exactly what you said, is have a list of an actual slide of references, but I don't show it.
Yeah.
If I know the people are going to get it anyway, I will just say there is a bibliography within the presentation you can use if you want, right? Mm-hmm. So there are two different things. There is, if I in that thing, I'm being asked to do a workshop about methods. So the structure of that talk is appropriate to give a bibliography. A 15-minute talk about a soundbite, essentially, of some data or something, that's not necessary.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.